Hello and welcome to Not Just Ads. In this episode, Erez Levin, an ad tech veteran, although as an Italian veteran, the word sounds like we are old people, are we?
Not that old, some grays, but yeah, this industry has aged us.
Absolutely. And Erez, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's great
We
to be
have
here.
many offline conversations, and very often, or almost always, focused on quality. But is it not sort of a paradox that we are talking about quality as if it was a niche? Shouldn't be that the average of the conversations in the industry and what happens in the industry?
It should be. I think my version of the story is that we've lost sight of quality for a decade or two, and now we're returning to a time where quality is sort of front and center, and accounted for again.
But do you think that quality, because that there are also different groups of thought in the industry, people that think, okay, no, we have to highlight the positives. The other group is saying we need to call out the negatives so that we can improve. What's your take on this black or
Um,
white
Of course,
approach?
neither. Of course, neither. But I generally believe there has to be a positive vision, and so that was, I saw the harms, I saw the waste and the fraud for a long time, like many other folks that have sort of been operators in the space. But we needed to also understand what's the right way to do it, and I believe that quality, not the only solution, but it's sort of central to how advertising can be a net positive and effective again.
When was your aha moment, if there was one, when you said, no, no, enough is enough?
It was gradual. I can't say that there was one moment. It was a buildup over time, and honestly, like I came into this industry in the digital world. I studied marketing in the pre-digital era, but entered the field when it was in the digital world, and I bought into, I drank the Kool-Aid thinking that we could solve Wanamaker's conundrum, that we could prove the efficacy of every single ad. And so it took some time to, red pill myself once I continuously saw, how these things were actually being gamed and it wasn't really driving to that incremental effectiveness.
And you have developed what you call the quality advertising trifecta. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a bit about this, please?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, advertising, there's sort of three pillars of driving advertising effectiveness. And there's always been this balance, and you see different studies about what drives the most impact. Is it creative? Is it the media? Is it the audience? And of course, it's all of those different things, and there's different studies that we've seen over time, and I think none of those are perfect, of course. But ultimately, what I think we lost sight of in this industry is considering the quality of these different dimensions. We've treated media and media buying too much like a commodity. And that's something that really the digital era and cookies facilitated, because we sort of lost sight of, oh, we want to buy certain media. We just said, let's just follow this user. We know it's Alessandro owns this cookie, and so we just follow him on the internet and buy ads to serve to him and measure if he took an action. What I believe we're going to see is the quality of media, of creative, and of data and audiences uh, going to become much more important, and really trying to figure out the balance of those three different components with the quality considered is going to lead to success for marketers.
So, quality as a horizontal uh, kind of characteristic of all the different areas,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
all the
it has.
different components.
Yeah, you can't treat media, and no sort of two media, sites and placements are the same. Same thing with any audience data that you have about a user. individual user, groups of users, and then creatives. Also, we need to think about them. And I think that one is probably the newest science that can help differentiate the quality of creative, right? We can see with eye tracking and emotional tracking and understand how creative affects different groups of people in different ways. I think that one is probably the most cutting edge science right now to develop.
There is one aspect whenever I'm talking about digital advertising that I feel that is mostly forgotten, which is the element, and we'll keep talking about the trifecta, but you mentioned audiences and the fact that audiences are in the picture, the one of the three main pillars. There is media, there is audience, there is the advertiser. But audiences are not coming into the picture because of ads. They don't come to click on ads. They come because they are attracted by content, because they want to read, because they want to watch, because they want to interact, to engage. So, how can we bring that? And that's a crucial element of quality, because the quality of advertising can only exist if there is a quality media environment, because it's in the quality media environment that the advertising takes place. So, how can we bring that aspect more into the conversation? I'll just make you an example. I go to events, and you have the ad tech events or the advertising event, and you have certain groups of people. And even talking about media owners, they think, they say, they claim they are in charge. Then you go to media events where you find a completely different crew, and they also say, think, claim to be in charge. And they are often working for the same companies.
Yeah, the left
Is
hand
it an
doesn't know what the
existential
right.
question?
Yeah, I don't think it's actually that existential. But I think it is. It's hard to nail down because it's so variable and it's so subjective, right? Because what does an audience? How do they value media? How do they assign quality to it? And I do think ultimately, and this is one of the big, maybe somewhat philosophical questions that we're grappling with now, is that a lot of consumers got used to this idea and believe that the internet is free and all of the content is free. And it never was free. Generally, we were trading our data, but sometimes our time and attention for content. Sometimes that was a more explicit trade off, but generally it was pretty implicit. And I do think that the level of quality of that content, it really determines how much a user is willing to give up their time, their attention on an ad, or their data, or anything else. And I think that's where we're going to see a change now, because there was too much of the web that was able to monetize low quality content, monetizing with seemingly users' attention, but in reality, users were ignoring those ads. And I think that's where we're going to see a change, as higher quality content is going to be able to command more attention from users, because it's the only place that that user can get that content.
And this digression, because I remember we had an interesting debate on LinkedIn regarding audiences and data. So in the trifecta, we have audience and data quality as a whole. And I stepped in by saying, well, I think you can have a great audience consuming great content, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have great data or data at all if there isn't a strategy in place. How do you see this? Because then it's not a trifecta anymore if audience quality and data quality are separated.
Yeah, this is I don't think there's a perfect answer here. I generally I think so much of this is subjective and up to the advertiser to decide how they're going to measure and value this. And so somebody visiting, the example I always give is the FT. The FT, we know on average has really high net worth individuals that visit it. Now, some of those folks are logged in and we know exactly who they are. Somebody knows exactly who they are and is passing information, maybe not the exact individual, but saying, no, this person lives here and these are their demographics. But even if you don't know exactly who is on the ft.com or which bucket they fall into, you can still guess that there's a high probability that they are more valuable. And so I think there's a little bit of a blurry line between audiences and audience data that might not be about that specific user, but other things that you might not know about them. And that's why I like to bucket those things together. But of course, data is everything. And so you can think about media uh, data, something that contextual data. So you are on about.com for motorcycle repair. That's all of a sudden two different things. Is it media data because you know it's, or is it audience data? Are you talking about the contextual signals and what does that indicate to you? And that really depends on how you're going to measure the value. How are you going to assign value to that media? Is it according to the person that you think is likely visiting it? Or is it because you know that people visiting or people who have motorcycles are also people who are DIY and do other things at home?
That's a very interesting point, especially the FT one, because I never thought it from this perspective. But we could say that, well, it is a confirmation of how strategy is important. Because you made the example of the FT, but why can you say all that? You can say that because the content strategy is so strong, the content is so unique and distinctive that you can almost guess who will, or without the almost, you can guess who will consume that content, which is also crucial. But again, it might be another digression
Well, I think
of mine.
I'll digress one other point here, which I think is really interesting. Goes back to this sort of subjectivity. You asked earlier about, I think about this trifecta. I don't call it a formula, and that's really important. And that goes back to one of my favorite sort of framings for this industry. Karl Popper was a famous philosopher of science, and he talked about he had a paper and gave a talk one time talking about clock sciences and cloud sciences. And so the way he described clock science, like a grandfather clock, it's very predictable and rational, and you know exactly how it's going to move, versus a cloud. A cloud, we know there's a lot of science behind clouds. We know different types of clouds and how they move and what colors they are and when they're going to rain and snow and things like that. But there's too many variables. They're too unwieldy. They're too unpredictable. And so, what he talks about is social sciences more broadly, but I think it applies to advertising. I believe we have treated advertising too much in the last 2 decades like a clock science, when in reality, it's much more of a cloud science. And so, you can think about all of these different elements, media quality and data quality and creative quality, try to put them together, but ultimately you're looking at probabilities. You don't know exactly. And so every single advertiser needs to sort of figure out what's their risk profile, what do they know, what's changing in their business. And so I think that's really an important element that I'm always considering when I don't say this is the exact right thing, that any advertiser, how they should blend these things and how they should think about audiences and data and media quality. It's more these are the framings and different considerations that they should take.
Absolutely. It's a combination of art and science. But it's interesting how everything comes together because when we talk about advertising, I keep using the expression the ecosystem. An ecosystem, in order to thrive, needs to be balanced. And we have a strong imbalance today.
Big time.
But back to the non-formula of the quality trifecta. Which other pillar which other circle do you want to pick now?
I mean, I'm biased towards media quality. It's the world that I've lived in. I sort of lived in this realm, especially of supply and demand, trying to target and value that supply. And so, media quality is where I think we've lost the most. Maybe I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say we've lost the most amount of sight because I think we have for data. I mean, the very obvious one for data quality is the repeated research that we see that third party cookies get gender wrong 50% of the time. And so, what's the point, right? Everyone is still relying on this thing that is basically like flipping a coin. Why even have this technology anymore? But I do think on the media side, and this is what I observed, is historically, um, or actually what I frame a lot of the challenges that our industry has is that the way that buyers measure value by media stayed basically the same while the sell side, while the whole ecosystem evolved very rapidly with new formats and new environments. And so the sell side innovated, the buy side didn't. And what the buy side really failed to do is maintain some sort of quality control. Everyone knows famously viewability. At once upon a time, viewability was actually a pretty valuable metric because it took out all of this non-viewable supply. But once buyers just said, okay, that's the metric we use, then everyone just created really small, tiny, viewable ads that it showed up for 1 or 2 seconds, and so the buy side didn't maintain or upgrade its quality controls. And so I think that's where the sort of lack of focus on media quality has really been what has hurt the industry, and where I think we need to focus moving forward.
Talking about media quality and of the need of having like an holistic uh, perspective and align the different parts. What do you exactly mean with media quality?
I tried. I think you can consider it regarding the audiences, and I try to separate and compartmentalize a little bit. Generally speaking, when I defined media quality or impression quality, it was everything about the media that has almost nothing to do with the audience visiting it. So replace whether it's you or me or somebody else, it's the box on the screen, and whoever is seeing that box on the screen or being exposed to it, what's the relative value of that placement, that ad versus another one? Not absolute, but
So
what's the relative value?
you're referring to the ad, not
The
to the
the
content.
Not the content, the placement. Although that placement, the content it's appearing next to, in between, is part of the media quality.
Sure. And I had a very interesting conversation some time ago about brand safety and what is brand safety. And I must admit, I slightly changed my perspective because I used to think quality lies in the domain. But then again, I have realized that some quality media brands at the end of the quarter having to reach their target, despite their quality content, they will flood their pages with ads and causing a degradation of the quality itself of brand safety. Um, it's an interesting, I think, dilemma.
Yeah, the incentives are generally to spend the budget. That's sort of the systemic incentives that are misaligned here. And so most folks are willing to loosen their standards a little bit, whether it's on the buy side or on the sell side, in order to fulfill a budget. And generally, everyone prefers that. I don't think it's the right thing for them, for their business, but the individuals in charge uh, will be in less trouble if they just spend that budget. And so I do think that, when I looked at to define media quality, I think there's a few different sort of categories that I looked at. And so you gave the example of the per domain. Well, even within a domain, you have large ads and small ads. You have video ads with the sound on, ones with the sound off. And so the prominence of an ad unit, that placement, is very important. That's sort of more in this attention realm. I also think about sort of the receptiveness of the user that's going to be the consumer that's going to be seeing the ad. And so another way that I think people call this is situational context. What time of day is it? Right? We've known that forever. You would serve somebody a different ad, or you would value it differently depending on the time of day that they were being served that ad. And so the time of day, what device they're on, if they're on the go or if they're at home, if they're in their car listening to, the audio ads, that might be worth more than if they were distracted and doing other things. And so that's another variable that gets very, very granular, but could be really impactful for advertisers to start to value differently.
I smile because it reminds me, talking about situational. I remember at my times at Yahoo when we had a campaign for ice creams in the summer. You know, in London, it's not very predictable the weather, and we would actually look out of the window, and depending on the weather, we would start an ad or stop an ad.
It's data based, yeah, yeah,
Pioneers,
data driven advertising. Um,
exactly,
no, but I mean,
exactly.
I think this is
Cloud.
pretty
It's all about the
the
cloud.
cloud,
It's not about the
exactly.
clock.
I think it's pretty well known that a lot of CTV, especially, right? CTV is almost in a unique world because it's such scarce supply and it's really valuable. But I think it's quite well known that in a lot of circumstances, a lot of situations, a lot of the CTV spend, especially in programmatic, happens in the middle of the night, right? The budgets refresh, and you see a lot of that sort of that spike in spend from midnight through overnight, and then sort of that dip in its spends throughout the day, which isn't ideal. It's a little bit of a supply and demand, but for most marketers, they should say that the ads are more valuable to them, not served to someone at 2 a.m., but at 2 p.m. or 8 p.m. And so buyers should be understanding this and should be assigning some sort of relative value. I'm biased towards this concept of custom algorithms and custom bidding, but I do believe that is one of the most efficient ways. Maybe it's not at scale, able to be bought because there's not as much of the sort of premium media available in open auction where it's biddable, but it's still the best way to price media where the system can look at, hey, all of the supply, here's the relative value based on these various parameters, and then find the most efficient price point given the demand out there.
Third pillar of the trifecta: creative.
Uh-huh. This one is really interesting. There's a lot of companies either sort of in this attention measurement and emotional sort of tracking and measurement. It falls largely in the pre-testing, but I don't think it's exclusively in this pre-testing realm. But understanding different types of users are going to look at and respond to your ads, sometimes in very subconscious ways, differently. And what do you do with that information? Do you change your ad? Do you serve it to a different audience than you intended to? Do you assign value to it differently than you would have otherwise? And especially in this realm where you can target ads, maybe not precisely always to the exact user, their age and their demo and things like that, but you know that you're targeting a site that is predominantly female or predominantly younger people. You might want to serve a different type of ad to them based on what you've seen in your pre-testing on the quality levels of your creative.
You mentioned attention, and I mean, I agree with you. Although I wonder where the space is for art in this, because in ad tech, we talk a lot of, as you said, we talk a lot about science and not much about art, to a point that sometimes I feel many have a vision of our tech for the sake of our tech rather than an enabler.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably broader the focus on short-term measurable results versus longer term and harder to measure, harder to prove deterministically results. And I don't know if it was actually Einstein that said, uh, not all things that can be measured matter, and not everything that matters can be measured. But I
I
think that's
can't confirm, not deny nor
I
deny.
think it's
But yeah, let's
attributed to him.
say
Yeah.
it was Einstein.
Yes, it sounds like it's somebody very smart. But yes, it's this idea that we assign too much value to things that we can measure, especially if we can measure them precisely, even if they're wrong, even if they're completely wrong, not just misleading, but actually wrong, rather than assigning value to things that are harder to measure. Or we can only measure them with some sort of broader probability and not necessarily the same precision.
Isn't it that because we have conflicting business models in the industry? Everybody is protecting and assigning uh, the decisive value to their own garden.
Um, Absolutely, the business model prevents it from being solved. I think there is part of it that's human nature, and so we should sort of just accept that. People don't like things that are imprecise, and especially you have to make really big business decisions and you have to scale them. So I believe I'm a senior leader, I'm the CMO. I understand that these things work in terms of probabilities, but how do I tell the junior folks on my team and my agency I have to give them some metrics to optimize towards. I have to still, build this big scaled practice. And so I do think some of these things are a little bit human nature, but certainly the incentives make it hard as well.
I started my career in digital advertising with iBlaster, which was the father of MediaMind, which was, and then the grandfather of Seismic. And I remember we were working on fantastic creative concepts and fantastic creative executions. Then, along the years, I had the feeling that automation meant flattening the creative space and the need of everybody focusing on the lowest common denominator. Things might be changing. What's your feeling about this statement?
Generally, I agree. Actually, there was a post today that talked about it was Eric Seufert was talking about creative wear out. Sort of you have a creative, and then at some point it reaches an inflection point and the performance drops. And my point is that that is probably true for performance advertising, but not for brand advertising. And so we have to distinguish here what the objectives are, because it really is night and day a lot of times. And a lot of ads do have value to drive both sort of long-term brand value as well as some short-term performance. But some campaigns are objectively just focused on only one thing or the other. And we're going to see very different needs there. And so you're going to see maybe that flattening is going to be true. Maybe you're going to see AI gen creative with strong performance signals, lots of variations, lots of churn. But I believe on the brand side, it's going to be a completely different um, sort of view and methodologies to develop a good creative, test it out, and then actually run it for a while without knowing exactly how it's performing. But knowing that that was something that tested very well historically, things like that worked well, and driving the brand uplift that you care about.
Why you don't like outcomes?
I love outcomes. I don't like the term outcomes.
Sure.
Ultimately, I think it's been gamed, right? I've heard everyone talking about outcomes. Sometimes they mean actual sales and incremental sales, and sometimes they mean clicks. Sometimes they just mean the number of viewable impressions or just
I
spending your
agree.
budget. And so I am concerned that sort of we're going to continue to have the system get gamed by focusing on any term that's just outcomes. I also think it's going to get harder to measure and attribute incremental outcomes to individual impressions. And so ultimately my current view, and I think this is has been really interesting for me to challenge my sort of anti-outcome lens. I'm for outcomes, but I'm for confirming that a campaign worked at the end of it by tying it back to some sort of performance indicator. But this obsession that we've had that every single impression and every single site has to be, tied back and attributed to conversions so that we can optimize in real time and do it granularly. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to work at scale for most advertising use cases.
And talking about obsessions that sometimes I also call delusions, the fallacy, the delusion of infinite reach, and not only infinite reach at the highest quality. So my question, and I ask almost everybody, and I haven't so far, I think, got a 100% satisfactory answer. How much reach is enough reach? Because it's a trap that we are stuck into, and I think that by solving this, we could unleash the quality. Well, first of all, we would have a better opportunity to focus on quality because quality would be easy to identify rather than let's look at the infinite.
Yeah, 100%. That's been my biggest frustration, and I've seen it in action, just how much it's corrupted a large part of this industry. This obsession with reach and scale without quality. And so, if we move to this world of quality adjusted reach, we're going to see, and I don't have a number, but it could be half, right? We could actually see the amount of reach, meaning how many times you need to actually serve an ad to somebody, drop in half, because instead of serving somebody 10 really small ads that they largely ignored, you maybe serve them half as many ads that cost more, but they are large, they're much more prominent. And the best example here, and you asked sort of what my aha moment was, but my obsession, another time I'm using it, is around in-stream and out-stream video. And so the definition that we ended up with, which I think was a fair and good definition 5+ years ago, maybe 7 years ago, for in-stream and outstream rather, was a little bit too vague, a little bit too open to interpretation, and it got gamed over time. And so what was meant to be like a YouTube, full screen sound on, someone is watching video content and gets served in a video ad, pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll, turned into small ads in the bottom corner, thumbnails that are muted by default. And why did that happen? Because buyers wanted in-stream, they checked the box, and if there wasn't enough of it, they couldn't spend. And so what did suppliers do? They created that. And they didn't lie, right? The definition was vague enough that they were able to fit it in there without it being caught. But now that definition has changed, and now as we evolve and everyone updates that the inventory that they're sending and how they're buying it to actually reflect in-stream, meaning sound on, buyers are going to grapple with this concept. There's finite reach, there's finite scale here. There's only so much in-stream sound on people actually trying to watch video content and seeing video ads, and they're going to understand that the supply demand dynamics are going to result in much higher prices, and they're going to have to start to look to other ways to value their media.
How do we apply that quality filter to reach?
Well, going back, there's too many dimensions to give a very simple answer, but I do think it is the
We have
prominence of.
time.
Yeah, we have time. So the prominence of the ad placement, right? The attention level of an ad unit. How likely is it to capture attention? All probabilities, but just start to say this is high, this is medium, this is low, will make a big difference. The other one is start to look at things like the time of day, things like geo. You can start to understand which kind of devices somebody is on, and you can just start to assign relative values, even as simple as high, medium, and low, will force these supply demand dynamics that have been gone, right? There's no supply demand if there's infinite supply. But as soon as there's constraints, then the buy side has to adjust, has to say, wow, this really, really valuable thing that everyone else also finds valuable, I'm going to have to be willing to pay more for it. And the arbitrage opportunity is, what is something that people aren't valuing enough? What's the missing opportunity here? Where can I actually go and buy media at a discount, even though it should be priced higher than it is today?
And it's interesting because this quality filter, I think it should be split in 50% between the buy side and the sell side, where while on one side, the buy side needs to uh, be more sophisticated and more focused and more strategic in buying media, the sell side needs to be more supportive of the buy side, needs to help the buy side in better discover and in an easier way the quality inventory out there and the quality environments. And that
Yeah,
can only happen if media owners work together. My pet obsession.
yeah. So I am not an expert here, but so my bias is from the buy side. Um, I do think the responsibility primarily falls on the buy side. They are the ones giving incentives to everyone, to every single middle layer, as well as to publishers themselves, the content creators themselves, about what they're going to pay for. And ultimately, they don't value quality; they value quantity. Just volume, high volume, quantity, number of impressions, number of viewable impressions, number of video completes, etc. Sound off, it doesn't matter. That's what they're going to pay more for. And so that's what the sell side responds to. I spent a lot of time, as well as I'm sure you have, talking to middle layers and talking to publishers and saying, hey, look, move to quality and show everyone that you are higher quality and you can command higher CPMs. And they all loved the sound of it, but at the end of the day, what could they make more money doing today, tomorrow, is quantity, not quality. And so it takes some bravery, it takes some real gumption to go out and say, you know what, we're not playing that game anymore. There are some publishers who've done it, right? The ones that have left the open auction. And I think they know their value and they know the unique value. So if you're the FT, you know that's okay. They're all gonna come to me. I know exactly who my advertisers are, and they don't have a choice because they want my audience so badly. But there's probably a lot of other high quality, unique content, but not unique as in they're irreplaceable. And so I think that's where you get into a tough space where you can't just say, you know what, we're going to leave the open auction. And if you want our inventory, you come buy it and you buy it at this price and you value it based on quality. You can do that, but you're playing chicken and you don't know how the buy side is going to respond. And so I'd love to see more publishers do it, but I understand why they haven't or why many haven't yet.
Yes, and I can see that perspective. I also see the evidence of those that have developed an approach of testing and learning. They haven't changed overnight. They changed gradually, and they were successful. We see alliances and premium marketplaces that are successful, not as successful because the individual members are also going solo at the same time. And this is something that if one has listened to every episode, they will probably now start crying, saying, please, please, please stop saying that. But yes, I believe that that's is also about who blinks first. And publishers are always the ones blinking first.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
I, 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 no, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, I feel like these are things that are we make gradual progress, so it's great. Especially
Yes,
you're seeing it, right?
absolutely.
You're seeing that on the
Absolutely.
sell side, and we're seeing on the buy side. One of the issues, one of the criticisms that I've had, but I also understand, is I'd like those publishers and those advertisers to be more vocal about what they're doing. Right now, they actually stand to gain more by not talking about it too much, right? Quietly getting these wins and being in a more successful place. But ultimately, that doesn't move the industry along, which is what we need to do, right? We need to raise all boats. And so, what I would like to see is more of the buyers that have evolved to a quality based buying and measurement, as well as publishers that say, hey, we're not here to just blast the most number of ads. We know our quality and we can command a higher price when we're not commoditized, to talk about how they've done so, maybe bringing more folks into a consortium with them, but at least getting more publishers to stop playing in that quantity based world.
And it's probably because of their not being vocal that it's us here talking about our obsessions.
Yeah, if you want to shut us up, then just go do that, and
Start
then
being more
yeah.
vocal. Absolutely.
Um,
Um, your expectation for 2025 to close this episode?
yeah. Expectations. I've been predicting for a very long time what I believed were inevitable changes, not just what should happen for this industry, but what I thought was inevitable. I thought things were getting worse, and at some point they reach a breaking point, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it slowly, gradually. Some buyers, eventually, there's an inflection point where enough buyers move towards quality that the incentives for the ecosystem switch. That hasn't happened, and I'm not actually banking on that to happen this year. What I do believe is going to sort of be the rug pulling moment, and I don't know when it's going to happen and if it will happen this year, but I am hopeful. Is the shock to the system that comes when we um, break the one of the two fallacies. So you mentioned the one fallacy, the infinite scale fallacy, the infinite supply fallacy. The other one is this measurement myth, this idea that we can precisely measure and attribute all incremental value. And so I think cookies going away would break that myth. And who knows when cookies will go away, but they're eroding and they're going to continue eroding. So I don't know when that turning point is. On the infinite scale side, I do still believe that when the fake in stream that still runs rampant in our ecosystem, when eventually that all gets reclassified, and from what I understand, a lot of that still is goes through Google's pipes. And so, really, it hinges on when Google decides to make the change on DV360 side to stop buying all of this fake in stream as if it was actually in stream. I believe that's going to force the ecosystem to grapple with supply constraints and then start to value quality accordingly. So I guess that's my prediction for 2025. It's hard for me to see that it will continue beyond, but I don't know. It's a little bit out of our control, but at this point, everyone knows about it, and I think the pressure will mount where that will have to change at some point.
Some people call me Columbo because I have always one more question. And don't you think, are you not feeling, as I do, excited by the time, by this era of the industry? There have been years where I was so bored about the flattening, about the race towards the bottom. Now it's a time of innovation, is a time of debates, is a time of change.
Absolutely. May you live in interesting times, I think is very true for us too. And what gets me really excited is the number of people talking about these things. It felt like the industry was sort of quietly everyone moving in unison. And if you had some concerns, you raised them privately, maybe amongst your friends, and then didn't talk about them publicly. And now the level of debate and the level of concern, and there's enough companies and interests and money behind sort of a new approach that feels to me more accurate, not perfect, but more accurate, more effective. And so I do think that there again, this tipping point is going to happen, and I'm excited to see more folks getting involved in that, as opposed to digging our heels in the ground and saying no, 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 everything is fine as is. Let's just keep going.
And this is exactly what everybody should be wishing for. Thank you, Eris.
Thanks, Alessandro.